Welcome to the Sunset Stories channel. Don't forget to subscribe and share your favorite stories with your friends. Thanks for your support and enjoy watching. Twilight was falling over the quiet residential neighborhood of Riverside. Soft lights began glowing in apartment windows, and a cool autumn breeze swept down the streets. I sat on the sofa, wrapped in a warm blanket, listening to the faint sounds of my husband, Michael, moving around in the next room. It felt like he was deliberately avoiding my gaze, as though he didn't know how to begin a difficult conversation. A cup of tea was growing cold on the coffee table in front of me. I couldn't bring myself to take a sip. My thoughts kept circling back to that brief phone call that had upended everything. Only that morning, Michael and I were a happy couple planning a weekend trip to see my parents. But by evening, our plans collapsed when he overheard me speaking to a stranger who mentioned my former clients. The look on Michael's face in that moment was something I'd never forget. I dreaded seeing his eyes now, filled not just with hurt or disappointment, but with a strange mix of curiosity and sorrow. He seemed to be holding out hope for some denial, yet he also couldn't ignore the truth. I sat in an armchair across from him, trying to steady my trembling hands. I finished graduate school not long before we met. I began in a shaky voice. I told you I worked as a secretary in an agency. That was partially true, but I never admitted I was also an escort. It lasted only a couple of years, but left a huge mark on me. My throat tightened, and I couldn't meet his eyes. I heard Michael draw a sharp breath. "Why did you hide this for so long?" he asked, his voice quiet but tense. "Why am I only finding out now?" "Because I was scared," I whispered. "You always said you valued honesty and faithfulness above everything." The reality of what I'd done flew in the face of that. I panicked and convinced myself I could just start fresh and bury all the old traces. A heavy silence enveloped the room. Michael stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening sky, as if searching for answers in the glow of the street lamps. "All right," he said at last, his voice subdued. "I'm not sure how I'm supposed to react, but I need to understand. I want to know what you hid from me. Tell me. Everything." In that instant, I realized there was no way out but to confess the full truth. Memories and emotions flooded my mind in a dizzying rush. Breathing became difficult. "You remember how I mentioned my hefty student loans?" I began haltingly. In grad school, I was desperately trying to make ends meet. One introduction led to another, and eventually I got an offer for easy money, supposedly just escorting wealthy men to events. But soon, more was expected. Over time, I ended up crossing lines I never imagined I would. Michael listened in silence, his jaw clamped tight. I could sense he was trembling inwardly, struggling to keep control. I walked away from it all when I realized how deep my shame went. I concluded. I saved up a bit of money to pay off debts and left. Then I moved to Riverside, met you, and tried to forget it like a bad dream. But now I can't hide it anymore. He stayed quiet. I could see the conflict in him. Part of him wanted to comfort me. Another part wanted distance. Silently, I let tears flow. I understood that only complete honesty might save us at this point. After a few long minutes, Michael finally spoke. "I'm not leaving right this moment," he said slowly, "but I need to process all this. I won't lie. It hurts like hell. I feel betrayed. But at the same time, I want to hear the details. Maybe that's the only way I can handle this." I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. It was as though we were standing on the edge of a dark chasm, forced to move forward, hoping for a glimmer of light at the end. The next morning, we barely spoke. Michael was grim and withdrawn. I was racked with anxiety every time I noticed his eyes on me. Late that evening, just as I was about to go to bed, he sat down beside me and said, "I've thought it over. I'm still in pain, but I feel I need to hear everything, or else my imagination will run wild. Tell me how it started." I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to gather my thoughts. It was during my second year of grad school, when my expenses totally overwhelmed me, I said. Rent, tuition. I was alone with no significant help from family. A friend introduced me to a man named Marcus, who recruited girls to accompany successful businessmen. The pay was huge. At first, I thought it was just a matter of social events and fancy restaurants. But before long, clients made it clear they expected more. And for the money, I found myself saying yes. I looked down at my hands, clenched so tight my knuckles had gone white. "And you told me you were just a secretary?" Michael asked, though he already knew the answer. Technically, I did office tasks, answering phones, sorting paperwork. But my main income definitely wasn't from that. I knew I was lying to myself, even then. I just kept justifying it because I needed the money so badly. Michael nodded. It was hard for him, but he urged me to go on. So I recounted my first clients, Bradley, a 40-something businessman who was polite at dinners, but ultimately invited me to a hotel suite one night. I was terrified. My knees shook from fear and curiosity. Bradley treated me gently, almost like a daughter, which only made it feel more disturbing and wrong. Michael was clenching his teeth as I spoke. Each of my words seemed to strike him like a blow, but he didn't tell me to stop. "All right," he finally said hoarsely. "What happened next?" Clients came and went. Some only wanted a companion for events. Others paid double if I agreed to intimacy. Sometimes they'd pay for multi-day trips if they were traveling. Like Paul, an attorney who hated society dinners and would go straight to a hotel. He'd whisper sweet things, give me compliments, and I'd let myself forget for a moment that it was all transactional. Michael gripped the arm of the chair so hard I thought the fabric might rip. My confession obviously tortured him with jealousy. Still, he stayed by my side, listening. "Did you ever have actual feelings for any of them?" he asked, trying hard to keep his voice even. "Sometimes I thought I craved genuine love." I answered. I'd get a fleeting sense of connection, but then I'd remember. To these men, I was an escort, a paid companion, a plaything. The emptiness always returned. Michael nodded heavily, and we fell into silence. The following day, we walked around our apartment like strangers. Conversation was minimal. That evening, Michael approached me. He said, "I realize that as painful as this is, I need to hear every bit of it. Otherwise, I'm tormented by the unknown and my imagination. Please tell me everything." Terror flared up inside me. Yet perhaps he was right. Better the bitter truth than endless guessing. "All right," I whispered. So we sat on the couch with only a dim lamp lighting the room, and I delved back into my memories. I told him about Lucas, who'd drive me out to his countryside house in his black SUV for short, intense encounters, then drop me back in town. And there was also Vladimir, a shy-looking IT guy with surprisingly bold fantasies. He asked me to indulge in mild BDSM, me, the strict teacher, and him, the naughty student. Part of me was mortified, but part of me needed the money, so I played along. More agitated as I spoke. I expected him to explode, but instead, he suddenly grabbed me in an embrace. I could feel how violently his emotions churned inside him. Pain, jealousy, a distorted form of desire. "I don't understand how it's possible," he said raggedly. "But the more I hear, the more I want you." I broke down in tears, holding him close. This outpouring of emotion evolved into a fiery sexual encounter. Never in my life had I felt such a mix of anxiety, guilt, tenderness, and raw desire. We spent a long time in each other's arms, as though trying to destroy all shadows of the past with our shared passion. Once it ended, I sobbed, and Michael drew me to his chest. "I'm not rejecting you," he said softly. "I just don't know how to keep living with these images in my head. But I love you." Tears streamed down my cheeks, and I told him I loved him more than life. We fell asleep at dawn, both emotionally drained, but feeling strangely closer. We slept until nearly noon. When we finally got out of bed, the apartment was silent, as though it, too, was catching its breath. There was a slight sense of relief. My secret was out. The question now was how we go on. Over breakfast, Michael forced a small smile. I'm still in turmoil, he admitted. But at least you're not hiding anything anymore. Let's do our best, okay? I nodded, grateful. Though the shadow between us remained large, honesty offered a breath of fresh air. But that same evening, his jealousy flared again. He paced around the living room, stopping abruptly. You mentioned you sometimes felt more than just a business transaction. I remember you hinting that you got emotionally involved with someone. Tell me about that. I sat down, clutching the edge of my sweater. Yes, there was one man, Adrian. Around 30, charismatic and kind of sweet. He could crack jokes that had me laughing until I cried. I started to lose my head around him. Part of me forgot he was my client. Michael's face darkened, and then he moved away with no real explanation. I was crushed, spent nights sobbing. That's when I realized I had to quit for good. I left the agency, changed my apartment, and ended up here. Michael fell silent, his fists clenched. He was grappling with the pain of knowing his wife once cared for another man. I couldn't blame him. Learning that I'd love someone else, no matter the circumstances, was a blow. For a few days, we barely discussed my past. Both of us were lost in our own thoughts. Finally, one evening, Michael spoke up. I think we can't do this alone. Maybe we should see a counselor, a family therapist who can help us communicate without tearing each other apart. I agreed. We found Dr. Helen Carter, a warm, empathetic woman of about 40. Her office was furnished with comfy chairs and gentle pastel paintings. Tell me what brings you here, she said in a calm voice once we settled in. Michael exhaled slowly, as though bracing himself. I found out my wife used to be an escort. My mind is exploding with jealousy, but I don't want to destroy our marriage. I love her. I bit my lip and nodded. I'm consumed by shame and guilt, and I'm terrified he'll leave. But now that the secret is out, I want to believe there's a way we can get through this. Dr. Carter asked us many clarifying questions and introduced a technique. Whenever painful images or feelings arose, we should stop what we were doing and name our emotions out loud, then discuss them calmly. She explained that bottling them up only lets them fester into worse conflicts. By the time we left, we felt drained yet encouraged. It was reassuring to talk to someone who didn't judge us, but genuinely wanted to help. A couple of weeks later, we headed to my parents' house, just as we'd planned before all this upheaval. I was nervous, sure they'd notice something was off. Michael did his best to smile politely at the dinner table while my mom asked, "How are you two doing?" And my dad fussed over small talk. "It's fine," I repeated, forcing a smile. "Just some work stress." Mom gave me a worried look, but kept her questions to herself. Later, when we were alone, she gently asked, "Emily, honey, is everything okay?" I gave her a tight hug. "We're working through something, but we'll be all right," I replied, not wanting to go into details. Driving back, Michael squeezed my hand. "Thanks for not telling them everything. I'm not ready for your parents to know," he said softly. "Me neither," I admitted. For now, it was enough that we were taking steps to heal. But peace didn't last long. A few days later, I was home alone when my old agency coordinator, Ryan, called out of the blue. He mentioned a small reunion for those who used to work at the agency, a casual get-together to catch up. My stomach turned. I declined immediately, but Ryan persisted. He claimed lots of people were going. Feeling cornered, I said I'd think about it. That evening, I told Michael. He frowned. "You want to go?" he asked quietly. "Honestly, no. But maybe it's an opportunity to face them and close that door completely." He was pensive for a moment. "If you decide to go," he finally said, "I'm coming too." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and dread. We arrived at an upscale restaurant rented for the occasion. Around a dozen people milled about, greeting each other. Some were cheerful, some wary. Ryan waved us over and gave us an awkward smile, clearly not expecting me to bring my husband. I introduced Michael as such, and some old acquaintances from the agency side-eyed us with curiosity. I recognized a couple of ex-escorts I used to befriend, Vicky and Amy. They politely asked how life was going. I kept my answers vague. I had no desire to share details. One of the newer hires whispered, "Wow, were you the one who used to get the biggest tips?" And I winced, knowing Michael heard. He remained composed, but was obviously uncomfortable. At some point, a man I barely remembered, maybe named Victor, came up, recognized me by my old nickname, and made casual conversation. It rattled me. Michael stood nearby, tense. Soon afterward, I whispered to Michael that I wanted to leave. We made our goodbyes and stepped into the cool night air. Outside, the crisp breeze hit my face. I inhaled deeply. "How do you feel?" Michael asked. Exhausted, I admitted. "I want nothing to do with that world anymore." He gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. "I'm glad we left." I was overwhelmed by jealousy, seeing how those people viewed you. I nodded. "Thanks for coming with me." For several weeks, we lived in relative peace. We rarely brought up the past, focusing instead on simple daily routines. Then, while strolling along Riverside's waterfront one afternoon, we ran into a tall man in a stylish coat. He recognized me instantly, addressing me by my old stage name. Michael stiffened at his side. Turned out the man was an acquaintance of one of my old clients, a wealthy guy named Stefan. After a brief greeting, he walked away. But Michael remained silent and brooding all the way home. There, he unleashed a controlled fury. "How many people out there know you, Emily? Sometimes it feels like no matter where we go, we'll meet someone who's seen you at your worst." I tried to calm him, explaining I couldn't control random encounters. He was understandably upset. That evening, I decided to give more context. I recounted who Stefan was, a man who hosted lavish parties. Yes, we had a regular intimate relationship while I worked as an escort. I watched the anger rise in Michael's eyes, but he didn't shout. When I finished, tears brimmed in his eyes. "It's painful picturing you in those situations," he murmured. "But hearing the facts is still better than my imagination running wild." He pulled me into his arms, and I stroked his hair, whispering how I belonged to no one but him now. Once again, jealousy and desire ignited, driving us to the bedroom. We clung to each other with an urgency that almost felt desperate, as if we could overwrite those old memories with our own passion. Afterward, we lay together, sweaty and breathless, relieved to still be close. We continued seeing Dr. Carter, learning to name our feelings without pointing fingers. Michael told her, "Whenever I'm reminded of Emily's past, some name or place, I feel an inferno of jealousy in my chest. If I don't let it out, it just grows worse." I added, "I wanted to see that I'm open and not hiding anything. But sometimes I worry that the more details I give, the more I'm hurting him." Dr. Carter helped us find a balance. If Michael needed clarity, I would share, but carefully, so as not to drown him in an avalanche of details. In turn, we worked on building new, joyful memories in the present, so the past would eventually pale in comparison. It wasn't easy, but we tried. We went biking together, caught a few movies, and cooked new recipes at home. Occasionally, Michael would sink into sadness out of nowhere, but I'd remind him to breathe and speak openly. Slowly, he was learning to manage the pain. Time moved on. An invitation arrived from Michael's parents to celebrate their wedding anniversary. The entire extended family would be there, uncles, aunts, cousins. Both of us felt uneasy, since we still weren't entirely stable in our relationship. The celebration, however, went smoothly enough. Michael's parents noticed we seemed closer than we had a few months ago. No one else suspected the turbulent storm beneath the surface. Toward the end of the evening, I stepped outside for some fresh air. My phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Hey, gorgeous," said a male voice. "Remember me? It's Jason. We had a couple of good times, didn't we?" I froze. Of course, I remembered Jason from my old life. Apparently, he'd tracked down my number. He sounded as if he assumed everything could pick right back up. "I'm married," I told him icily. "Don't call me again." He laughed dismissively. "Come on, we had fun." I hung up and immediately blocked his number. My mood was ruined, though. Inside, Michael read my expression right away. In a hushed tone, I told him what happened. He looked furious, but not at me. Just block him, Michael said, exhaling. If he keeps trying, we'll handle it. I trust you. My heart flooded with gratitude. Some months ago, this would have ended in a huge fight. Now, he believed me and stood by my side. Therapy and our honest communication were paying off. The months continued to pass. We learned to talk openly. Michael stopped eyeing my phone nervously, and run-ins with old acquaintances no longer felt so catastrophic. He still carried pain, but we addressed it right away whenever it flared up. One morning, as we lay in bed, drowsy from the weekend, Michael asked, "So kids, maybe?" My mom keeps hinting about grandkids. What do you think? It used to be a terrifying question. Now, I felt a little flutter of excitement. Maybe soon, but not right this second. I want us to be in a healthy place emotionally before we bring a child into this. He kissed my forehead. I agree. Let's strengthen our bond more first. Just when life felt calmer, I found an unmarked envelope in our mailbox. Inside was a note. "Hello, Emily. I'm back in town. Care to meet? Adrian." My heart pounded. Adrian, the man I once nearly fell for. Why would he resurface now? I showed Michael the note, watching jealousy spark in his eyes. "The one you actually had feelings for?" he asked. "Yes," I said softly. I have no clue what he wants. Curiosity, maybe. He set his jaw. "If you want closure, maybe you should see him." But I hate the idea. I nodded, my pulse still racing. "If I do, it will be in a public place, and I'll tell you everything. No secrets." We agreed on a Saturday afternoon at a busy cafe near the river. Michael insisted on coming too, sitting at a separate table. I readily agreed. I wanted no semblance of secrecy. At 4 o'clock, I was already there, nervously sipping sparkling water. Adrian arrived soon after, tall, confident, with that sharp gaze I remembered too well. "Emily," he said with an easy smile, "you look even better than before." I remained seated. "Hello, Adrian. Why did you contact me?" He ordered a latte, casual as ever. Familiar feelings of hurt and resentment threatened to bubble up. "I moved back for work," he explained. "Thought of you. We had something special once." "Special," I repeated bitterly. "I was your paid companion. Then you left me behind like an afterthought." He shrugged, muttering an excuse about family problems. I told him I was married now. He glanced around and spotted Michael observing us. "That your husband?" he asked. "Didn't expect a chaperone." "It's not about that," I said firmly. "He's here because our relationship is built on honesty now. I'm here only to close the door on the past." Adrian nodded, pushing his empty cup aside. "So no chance for us to pick up where we left off?" "None," I replied bluntly. "I don't need or want anything from you. My life is different." He sighed, stood, and said, "All right." Had to see it for myself. "Take care, Emily." He laid some money on the table and left. I watched him go, feeling relief more than anything. Michael joined me, looking cautious. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. I told him I love my husband. He knows that's all that matters now. Michael took my hand, and we headed home. That evening, we talked quietly over tea. I told him every word, and though he was still tense, he seemed calmer than I'd expected. "That's that then," he murmured. "No more illusions." "Yes," I replied. "It's over." Life felt strangely lighter after that. Our conversations got easier. We began focusing on simple joys, redecorating a room, planning a weekend getaway. Michael still had flickers of jealousy, but the intensity had dimmed. One night, we decided it was time to see Dr. Carter less often. Our sessions were winding down. She praised our progress. "You faced your triggers and learned not to let them consume you." We left her office feeling proud. Soon after, my parents invited us to my dad's 60th birthday party, a small family affair. We had dinner, answered relatives' usual questions about children and the future. My mom gave me a look that said she was happy we seemed so peaceful. I smiled, grateful she didn't press for details. On the drive home, Michael squeezed my hand on the steering wheel. "I'm glad your folks don't know everything," he said softly. But I'm also glad we've come far enough that we can spend an evening with them and not feel crushed by secrets. I nodded, resting my head on his shoulder for a moment. We were truly making progress. After a few more therapy sessions, Dr. Carter suggested we move to a maintenance schedule, coming in only if we felt the need. We'd learned how to handle painful thoughts or triggers without letting them spiral. We found ways to create positive experiences and shared intimacy. Sometimes, Michael would even tease me with playful role plays, no longer out of guilt or anger, but because we were genuinely exploring each other's fantasies in a trusting environment. Eventually, we both realized we wanted to take the next step, looking for a larger apartment, maybe even a small house. Moving felt symbolic, as if we were leaving behind any lingering ghosts. We ended up finding a more spacious place on the other side of Riverside, with sunny windows and a little balcony. It took a few weeks to arrange everything. We moved in the winter, hauling boxes through a dusting of snow. Standing among the half-unpacked cartons in our new living room, we watched the city lights through the large windows. Michael raised a glass of wine. "To us, to our future," he said. "No secrets, no jam." I clinked my glass against his, feeling a warm glow rise through me. Part of that warmth was the wine. Part was the knowledge of how hard we'd fought to reach this peace. Time passed, and we settled into everyday life. Outsiders might have seen us as a perfectly normal couple. Only we knew how much we had overcome. Once in a while, I'd still get a jolt of anxiety if something reminded me of my old escort life. Maybe a social media post about escort services or seeing a familiar face. But I no longer hid or lied. Michael knew my story, and we could discuss it openly, usually in just a few sentences. A couple more times, old clients found my phone number and tried to reach me, but I'd immediately block them and show Michael. He'd have a flash of jealousy, but calm down once I reminded him that it was the past, and that the past had no power over us anymore. Gradually, those old shadows lost their grip on me. I wasn't proud of that chapter of my life, but I had made peace with it. I was thankful for the lessons learned, the biggest being the value of true trust and unconditional acceptance from someone who loves you. Michael often told me that seeing the rough path I'd traveled made him more empathetic and aware of vulnerability. I, in turn, cherished him for staying. He could have walked away, and society wouldn't have blamed him. Instead, he chose to fight for our marriage. Our intimate life changed as well. We replaced silence with honest conversations, discussing hopes and desires. Sometimes we still tapped into the blend of jealousy and passion, but it was now a consensual game, not a wound we inflicted on each other. That difference drew us closer rather than pushing us apart. One day, I noticed a date on the calendar. Almost a full year had passed since the day my awful secret came to light. Mentioning it to Michael, I saw him flip back through his own planner. "You're right," he said. "A year. Hard to believe." We sat in our new kitchen, drinking tea, remembering the tears, the confessions, the fear of losing each other. But now it felt like we'd emerged stronger, bound by a deeper sense of honesty. "I think we made it," I whispered, feeling my throat tighten with emotion. "We did," Michael agreed. "And I'm thankful I didn't run that first night. I never imagined my jealousy could become a bridge instead of a canyon between us." Smiling, I felt a wave of relief. We went to bed, and he gently wrapped his arms around me. "No more secrets, big or small," he whispered. "I promise," I said, returning his kiss softly. "And you promise too." We lay there, listening to the city's night sounds through the window. I believed our future was bright. Children, travels, and even more life challenges. Ones we could handle because we'd learned the power of truth. We can't erase the past, but we can transform it into a lesson that helps us build a better future. If there's a moral to our story, it's that sometimes the only way to save love is to risk it all and reveal who you are without masks. And now we both know the reward is worth every ounce of effort, a trust stronger than we ever thought possible. That's the end of our story. We hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. Your feedback means a lot to us.